Started shortly. We'll be getting our conversation going in about 1 minute, top of the hour. Hello and welcome everyone to Common Sense Education's session this Friday morning. Can we learn from Mr. Rogers' blueprints? And welcome to Remake Learning Days, where there's over 1,500 events happening across the country. And these events are bringing families together to wonder, learn, and explore together. And we're going to go ahead and put that link in the chat, and you're going to learn a little bit more about Remake Learning Days and how all of this ties to Fred Rogers. Reason I'm bringing it up is because Common Sense Education is a really proud partner of Remake Learning Days across America, where you can check out in-person, virtual, and on-demand events where families are coming together to learn with their children. My name is Jennifer Ehal. I'm the regional manager at Common Sense. Joining me today are Gregg Behr, who's the executive director of the Grable Foundation and the co-chair of Remake Learning Days. And we also have Ryan Rydzewski. Oh boy, I was going to get this right? I was going to get this right. I'm going to get this right. Ryan, my friend Ryan.
You all can call me Ryan.
Ryan, who is also a science and education writer and also a former educator. So welcome to both of you.
Thank you for having us.
I'm so excited to talk about this story today. We're going to talk about curiosity. We're going to talk about creativity. We're going to talk about connections and the work of Fred Rogers. So, Fred was one of my personal favorites when I think back to my childhood. And we keep saying this name, Fred Rogers. I would love to have each of you describe, Mr. Rogers is, maybe someone doesn't know Mr. Rogers, how would you describe him to someone that it's new to them? Gregg?
Well, Mr. Rogers was an icon of American television, right? Those of us privileged to watch Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood as kids got a chance to learn and wonder in our living room alongside Mr. Rogers and so many other people on that program. That program began airing in 1968 and ran for more than 30 years, nearly 1,000 programs that we got to experience. And, Ryan and I are Western Pennsylvania kids. And I mention that because Fred Rogers and his program originated from WQED, America's first public television station, right here in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where I'm situated right now. And it's a program that aired all across the country. And it connects directly, Jennifer, to Remake Learning Days, because all of these programs and all of these activities that you described happening all across America, people are working to create wondrous, creative, joyful neighborhoods of learning, just like Mr. Rogers did on that television program. So happy Remake Learning Days.
Yes. I mean, I've been dipping myself into a lot of these events and joining a lot of them on demand and virtual. And I haven't found a bad one yet. They're all just so inviting and you're learning from them. And I've had a great time over the last few weeks with my kids, just joining some of that stuff. Ryan, what does Mr. Rogers, how would you describe him from your perspective?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so like Gregg explained, he was a children's television host. So those of us who grew up watching his program, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, we all remember how Fred made us feel, right? He had these warm, comfy sweaters. He spoke really slowly and plainly, and he looked straight into the camera, and he felt like he was talking to us. And he made us feel special. He made us feel safe. He made us feel accepted. He just made us feel good. And so the question that Gregg and I have been trying to answer for more than 4 years now is how? How did Fred do that for so many people? How did he make so many people feel so good? So many people from so many different walks of life for so many years in a row. It's amazing when you think about it. And ultimately that journey to figure out how Fred do that became this book, When You Wonder, You're Learning.
Absolutely. And I mean, we could probably go on and on about Fred himself, right? I mean, he's people's heroes.
Sure.
You're right. Like, wow, he really knows me. And you'd like look around your living room, like, is he in my living room? Like, how does he know that's what I'm feeling? So he was definitely someone extremely special and unique and for the good. So yeah, we're going to talk. Our story really is going to come from this book, When You Wonder You're Learning. And a lot of the things that we're going to talk about today come from the 6 areas of this book, right? And we're going to focus in on 3 of them, starting with creativity. And, you know, that's such a big word. I know in the last 2 years, I've never created so much in my life with my kids. I have a 5 and 7-year-old, and the creativity in this home was, I really can't look at a craft these days. I just can't do it. I'm like a little crafted out, but the creativity is always happening. And so that's like one of the first parts of the book, the creativity piece. I'm sorry, the curiosity. I'm sorry, the
Oh, we're
curiosity.
talking about both. We can start with creativity.
Yeah, sorry. Okay, yeah. So one of the chapters focuses on, you know, the creativity, and there's obviously this story about Fred himself and how adults can support creativity. And I would love for you to just tell us a little bit about the sculptor.
Yeah. So this is a great story because, as Ryan was saying, we think about Fred in that loving, caring way, right? That grandfatherly figure who was on our television program. And he was also a remarkable learning scientist. And I mention this because as he decided to get into children's broadcasting and to use the technology of television to minister to children in loving, caring, educational ways, it was some of his teachers who said, well, you better learn something about child development theory and practice, as all great teachers do, right? That's how we ended up at a place called the Arsenal Children's Center here in Pittsburgh. And I mention that because it was at Arsenal that some of the world's most incredible learning scientists happened to be. Now, that wasn't a phrase that we used 40 years ago, learning scientists, but we understand it now as a field about which we learn about learning itself. So who was at Arsenal? There are folks like Benjamin Spock, the pediatrician whose book, Baby and Childcare, is one of the best-selling books of all time. There was Erik Erikson, whose work on identity development means so much. And there was also Margaret McFarland, who was a psychiatry professor at the University of Pittsburgh who became Rogers' lifelong mentor and dear friend. So Rogers was learning from these people in incredible ways. And we cite in chapter 2 on creativity this story that you mentioned about a sculptor. Because one of the things that Fred learned from Margaret McFarland was this idea that attitudes are caught, not taught. And it's conveyed in this simple story whereby Margaret McFarland had invited a sculptor to Arsenal Children's Center. And you can imagine the sculptor said, like, oh, what do you want me to build? What do you want me to make? What do you want me to show the kids? And Margaret said to the sculptor, I just want you to love the clay, and I want you to love the clay in front of the children. What a beautiful instruction to a world-renowned sculptor to convey a love for learning before those children. And it's one of the lessons that Fred learned so well. And he expressed it in the sensibility that the best teacher in the world is the one who loves what he or she does and loves it right in front of you. And that's what great teachers do.
That's right. And Ryan, I would love for you to share how you, or what advice you would give educators, you know, and how to spark creativity in their classroom.
Sure. So, well, in the neighborhood, it started with Fred, right? With the adults in the room. And so almost every time we entered the neighborhood, we'd find Fred doing something that, you know, other adults might consider childish. So Fred paints pictures of butterflies and he builds things out of popsicle sticks. And he does all these things that, you know, whatever he's doing, he makes it clear to viewers that whatever he's doing brings him joy, right? And he brought in all these creative guest stars too, people like Yo-Yo Ma and Wynton Marsalis. Sometimes they were creative professionals like them, but other times he also just brought in adults who were just everyday people who still indulge whatever their creative passions happen to be. So if you remember Officer Clemens, he was the neighborhood police officer, but he was also the neighborhood opera singer. If you remember Handyman Negri, he was the neighborhood sort of fix-it guy, but he was also the neighborhood guitarist. So one of the things Fred did was model creativity and the joy it could bring himself. And he also surrounded kids, exposed them to all sorts of creative adults, letting them know that, you know, we don't have to give up our creative pursuits as we get older. These things that enrich our lives aren't just for kids. Now, there are been all sorts of science that's come out since Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood was on the air. And in fact, there are two psychologists named Dorothy and Jerome Singer who have sort of distilled Fred's method for teaching creativity down to 4 sort of discrete steps. And that is, in order to be creative kids, in order to create an atmosphere in a classroom or a learning space that encourages creativity, you need 4 things. You need 1, an adult who encourages and even joins in children's play. So you can think about that in terms of the neighborhood as being Fred himself or all of these guest stars. You need a dedicated, sacred space for that play. So in the neighborhood, this would have been the neighborhood of make-believe, this place where we went where anything was possible, right? Now in the real world, maybe it's the corner of a kitchen table or part of your classroom or part of your basement at home. The third thing you need are simple objects that enrich the imagination. So if you think about the neighborhood, Fred never used fancy toys or expensive equipment. Instead, he used blocks and he used cardboard tubes and he used popsicle sticks, all these things that encourage creativity and yet are accessible and available to almost every learner. And the fourth thing you need is unstructured free time. And that's something that we know kids have less and less of today, both at home and at school. There are lots of things that kids need to do, but without that free time to just sit and wonder and create, kids' creativity doesn't quite develop as rapidly as it might otherwise. So we see this in the neighborhood. There are whole entire scenes of Fred just sitting there watching paint dry, or Fred singing songs about, what should we do when we're bored? And it's in that sort of in-between space, in that unstructured space that creativity springs from.
Absolutely. I think my most favorite phrase coming from a child, a kid, older kids, I'm bored. Oh, you're bored? It's the best. Okay, be bored. I want to watch my child be bored and see what happens. And amazing things happen. And you're right. Whether at home or in the classroom, I know I send tons of, what you would throw away, right? Junk, paper, toilet paper rolls, paper towel rolls, Kleenex boxes, I have a younger kids, but like that K-5, educators love that stuff. Yes, bring the bag of stuff in. We'll put it on this craft table or maker table. And yeah, some of the creations that they share out from the classroom, whether it's an email or via Twitter, see so many cool things from these tiny little minds. And I also think you see a lot of creation and creativity in the middle and high school kids too, when they actually take some time to create, even on social media, or create videos or podcasts, or it's all creation, that's all being bored and finding a hobby or something that really inspires them to create. And so at all the levels, I think.
Jennifer, sometimes it is the technology, right? Sometimes it is those materials that we were just talking about. But there are developmentally appropriate and wonderful ways to use technology. And we should think about Fred himself, right? Because Fred used the newfangled technology of television, something that seems so normal now, but it was remarkably still innovative when he started producing. And he said, how do I make this technology good and constructive? Because it's attractive to kids. So, how do we think about TikTok or other hardware, software, social media in ways that are constructive and good because they're attractive to young people?
Exactly. And part of my role is saying it's okay. Yeah. It's okay that your child is, using technology in some of these ways because it can be powerful. Yeah. Whether it's a civic engagement piece or, whatever they're doing to use those platforms for a voice. Student voice is really important in these sectors and in these areas. So yeah, creativity never gets old, at least not for me. And then let's go on to the next one, which is curiosity. The word wonder, obviously, is another wonder board. They all go together very nicely. And so, it's very fitting. And the wonder and curiosity is really important. And what role did it play in Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood? The wonder piece was just, I always wondered where that trolley was going. I know it was going to the make-believe neighborhood, but it went through that little tunnel and you were just like, where is it going? The wonderment of 30 minutes was incredible. So
yeah, I mean,
So what do
wonder
you
what
think?
it was foundational in a neighborhood. And for one simple reason is that wonder is foundational to learning, right? There are researchers who compare the feeling of curiosity to the feeling of when the curtain goes up on a play or a movie that you really wanted to see for a really long time, where we're excited, right? And we're fascinated. And researchers have found that when our brain is in that state, when we're curious, when we're really wondering about something interesting happens. Not only do we learn more about that thing that we're curious about, our brain starts to take in all sorts of other information. So let's say we're curious about this movie, but because we're curious, we're learning about the language they're using in the movie. We're learning about acting. We're learning about all these other things. And so when you're curious, your brain sort of switches on. Your sort of capacity for learning switches on. And so when Mr. Rogers sang a song called Did You Know that includes the title of our book, When You Wonder, You're Learning, he was speaking literally. When you wonder, you are learning, or at least your capacity for learning switches on. So if you watch basically any episode of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, you'll find him telling viewers how many questions he has. And you'll find him telling viewers how much he wants to know about the world, because he knew how important it was to model curiosity too. And so he showed us that, whatever we do together, or wherever that trolley goes, he'll be learning along with him. And this goes back to that sense of attitudes being caught, not taught, that Gregg talked about earlier.
Right. I think he was always good at like those prompts, because sometimes we get we're at a loss for how do you prompt your children or your students to spark curiosity. I feel like it could be personal, but creativity to me is easier. You can kind of it's just easy. It feels easier. Curiosity feels like there's a little bit of a layer there. Like, how do you encourage your kids? How do you model curiosity, I guess? Right. And help.
Let me give you a really concrete example how you might curiosity, because so in our book, at the end of each of the 6 chapters, we try and give you examples, not because I'm a perfect parent or Ryan's a perfect teacher, far from it, right? We curated examples from people around the world of things that they're doing to prompt creativity and curiosity. And one of the greatest examples to me of prompting curiosity came to us from Hedda Sherpa. Hedda, an educator herself who began working with Fred Rogers on the first day of production back in 1968. And she gave us this example of walking into a classroom and noticing that the teacher had in the front of the classroom a really large wicker basket that was empty, and wondered, what on earth is that wicker basket for? As Hedda watched the instruction unfold in the classroom, she noticed that the kids were asking lots and lots of questions. Sometimes they were directly on point with what the teacher was talking about, and sometimes they came right from over the left field wall, like, what on earth did this kid just ask? But regardless of what the kids were asking, unless it was necessary for the instructional moment, the teacher took the time to notice the question, to acknowledge it, wrote it down on a piece of paper, and said, we're going to put it in the ask it basket, that large wicker basket, and later together, we're going to wonder about it. Now, that was important from a tactical standpoint because it let kids know it's okay to wonder, it's okay to ask questions, and we're going to have the safety and the space to pursue answers to our questions later. Now, that's something any teacher can do, any librarian can do, any mom or dad or aunt or uncle or grandparent in their own home can do with a Rubbermaid, bowl in the kitchen. We can all create sort of ask it basket-like things in our lives that then prompt and sparked curiosity on all of our parts, adults and kids alike.
I like that. And I really like that because there's so many ways to find the answers now. You can look, there's this thing called Google that allows you to look really smart. So, or even just YouTube videos of how to, and I mean, the resources that we have access to really showcase the answer to these questions, I think is really powerful and really fun. Yeah. I had a question come in. I don't think it really ties to curiosity, but I am curious as to what you think Fred Rogers would do around TikTok today. Do you think he would have embraced that? Because I do think he could have been making really cool videos, right? I don't know, but I just wonder, and maybe TikTok's one example, but just all of these social platforms where it kind of ties into our next topic, connections.
Yeah.
Right? And you don't have to answer that, but just as we talk about connections. Yeah.
So Ryan and I paused because we would never pretend to answer,
Right.
what Fred would do. And having studied his work and understanding what it was that drove him, he would have been curious enough to say, given that this is attractive to young people, is there a way to make it good and constructive? Just the way I described earlier in terms of taking that newfangled television. So I suspect that Fred and all of the other people around him who were part of Family Communications, now called Fred Rogers Productions, would have wondered about a software platform like TikTok or new devices like artificial intelligence or VR or other things. And they would have wondered to say, kids, this lights kids up. Can we use it in good and constructive ways that promote curiosity and connection and creativity?
And I think as adults, coming from that generation of Fred, we all try to do that as educators too. Okay. There's all these things that students are gravitating towards, whether it's gaming, all these new ways to connect and create and play in different ways. But I feel like, shout out to educators and teachers because they're doing a good job in trying to find ways to incorporate these things into the classroom in meaningful ways to take learning further, to show kids and engage kids in different ways and meeting them where they're at. So it's kind of neat, right? So for connections, that was one of the other sections of one of the chapters of your book. So much, obviously, of what Fred did, it really came down to relationships. I mean, you really felt like you knew Fred, right? You wanted to hug Fred. So why do you think relationships matter? Where do the relationships come into play?
Well, I'd love to turn to Ryan to give some phenomenal examples of his own role as a teacher and what we've seen out in the world. I think we'll say simply this. When a journalist asked Fred, what is it that you're creating here in this program? His pithy response was an atmosphere for learning. And I think that sensibility is so important because it's in an atmosphere for learning, anchored by caring adults, and caring adults who create that psychological safety, that prompt creativity and curiosity, that let us know that we belong. Those are environments where we can learn and learn how to learn. And we hear all around us right now all sorts of debates about education and learning, like math should just be math instruction. Well, actually, not really, right? First and foremost, the adults in kids' lives, whether it's a teacher or a librarian or a caring adult at home, we have to create those atmospheres for learning. And those atmospheres for learning are grounded in connection and relationship with the kids that we love.
Yeah, I mean, there's all sorts of science about this now. In the book, we cite this really fascinating study from the University of Washington that followed kids for 30 years. So they split these kids basically into two groups all the way back in the 1980s. And one group, their parents and their teachers got some help building stronger relationships with their kids. The other kids didn't get any extra help. They were just the control group. They followed these kids for 30 years. And what they found was that by the time these kids were adults, the ones who were in the group who had stronger relationships with their parents and teachers were outperforming their peers on everything. They were making more money. They were more involved in their communities, more likely to vote. They were even healthier physically. And so what the researchers concluded was, the most important thing you can do for your kids, they boiled it down to one or two simple sentences: play with them, hold them, be there with them, just be present in their lives. And it's this just a sort of beautiful, simple testament to how much this stuff matters. And I'll just give you a personal example from when I was an educator myself. So I started off in the classroom. I taught 4th and 5th grade to an amazing group of students. And then I became an educator coach. So I was supporting different teachers in different schools all across. I was living in Louisiana at the time. And so I saw lots of different schools, right? Lots of different atmospheres for learning. And there was this one school that was just, you felt good when you walked through the door. And I could not figure out why this was, right? You know, it looked the same physically as all the other schools, same student population, same level of resources. There was nothing tangible that I could point to and say, oh, that's what this place is doing right. And so finally, I just asked the principal one day, I was like, I cannot figure it out. What are you doing here that other schools aren't doing? And right away, I mean, she almost like she had been prepared for the question. She says, every year at the beginning of the school year, for the first 2 weeks, we don't teach any content at all. We don't do any work. We don't do any test prep. All we do is intentionally build relationships with the kids who walk through the door. And they had all sorts of ways that they would do this, right? It wasn't just hanging out and talking for 2 weeks. They had structured ways of building relationships, but that was their focus. And she said, every year I get flack from all my peers, from the school board, because this is not what we're supposed to be doing. We're supposed to jump right into content, jump right into test prep. And every year we outperform all the people who are telling us not to do it. And so she had been doing that year in and year out because she knew that those relationships worked. And she had the numbers and the performance data to back it up.
Wow. I want that on video. Can we capture that testament? Yeah, I've seen just even a lot this past year, like relationships before rigor.
Yes.
And that stands out in my mind all the time, because if you don't have the relationship, you don't have the trust, that's a skill that's continuous.
Yeah.
You know, we're teaching it at the youngest ages, middle school, high school, but as adults, you know, it comes down to relationships, whether it's family relationships, friendships, or professional relationships. You know, you can go so much further with that relationship piece than you may not before, prior to that. I mean, that's where my heart is. The relationship piece it's where the joy is, you know, and it's the why behind what you're doing and why you're doing it. So that's awesome. That's really great. And, you know, one of the things that my colleagues and I are really excited about for summer professional learning for educators as we go into the back, you know, I know we haven't even had the last day of school, but as we go back to school in the fall, we're already thinking about those things. And top of the mind right now is building a culture, a really safe, positive, healthy classroom culture. And how are educators doing that? What are things that educators need to think about to build that culture on those first 2 or 3 weeks of school? You know, whether it's process, routine, norms, you know, whether it's in classroom norms or online norms as they connect with, you know, digital tools in the classroom. So our focus is going to be really big around, you know, the family engagement piece, you know, making sure that we're building these relationships with our families that we serve. And I'm just really excited about that because I don't think it's something we often think about. It's all about the lesson planning and all about, you know, the schedules and the PD and all, you know, but really having teachers really sit and wonder, what do I want my, you know, what's the feel of my classroom? How do I want to spark curiosity in my classroom? How do I want to make sure the kids are connecting? How do I make sure the students understand who's in the classroom? The perspectives, the values, the backgrounds, all of that plays a role in how they're learning and, you know, how they're connecting. So it's just something I'm passionate about. And I look forward to sharing that out with our educators, and hopefully it'll be helpful.
And Jennifer, what you've just described, I mean, is essentially what we try and unpack in our book, right?
Yeah.
We describe it as the Fred method, being very deliberate and very intentional about connecting all that we know about whole child development, practice, and theory, connecting all that we know about the learning sciences and what we're learning about itself. Whole child plus learning sciences equals the Fred method. And Fred in his program was so deliberate and so intentional and so smart about it that all of that was seamless to us. We didn't really notice it because it was the magic that allowed all of the other things to happen. And this is why in our classrooms, in our schools, in our neighborhoods, we need to be deliberate and intentional about doing the very things that you just said and making sure that we employ that Fred method in ways that are profoundly important, maybe more so than they were during Fred's own time.
I know. And I'm excited to even think about how I want to think about how to incorporate this into that onboarding piece, because I feel like it's also that trust. like, oh, Fred Rogers. Yes, you have my ear, because he really was a smart human and he was way ahead of his time in terms of,
and he
the
bridges
way he thought.
divides, right? Like everybody,
Yeah, I mean,
almost everybody loves Fred, regardless of your political affiliation, your background, wherever you come from, how old you are. Almost everybody loves Fred. And, he gives us a shared language, and it's a very straightforward and inclusive language that I don't think pushes anybody away. When we can talk about social and emotional learning, but now that term now has all sorts of baggage. But we could also look at the neighborhood and talk about, like, how do we make sure kids feel safe, right? How do we make sure that kids feel that they belong to a community that cares about them? How do we make sure, as Fred liked to say, that they feel loved and capable of loving? I think that's something we can all get behind.
Fred can be healing.
Absolutely. Yeah. He's just, This was such a joyous session already. I mean, I'm already smiling on my Friday. This is just the best. But I don't want to remiss Remake Learning Days, because that's how it all started, right? And we keep saying Remake Learning Days, and we put the link in so you can kind of see some ideas there. But please share, right? Like, how does this all tie together? You can make Remake Learning Days come alive much more than I can. But if you want to add anything to that whole idea of these events.
Yeah, so for me, Remake Learning Days is like a holiday, and a really special one at that. And Ryan and I feature Remake Learning Days in our book. So it's a learning festival designed for families that began here in Pittsburgh and in southwestern Pennsylvania and northern West Virginia 7 years ago. And here in this year of 2022, there are 17 cities and regions across the United States hosting Remake Learning Days, and also hosting online so that anyone, anywhere in America can participate in Remake Learning Days. There are nearly 1,500 events to help parents understand what's happening in the arts, in the sciences, in design, in the things that bring us great joy in learning. And Remake Learning Days is really designed to be hands-on, interactive for adults and kids to explore and wonder together. So you might understand, maybe my kid is lit up by making or coding or things that I'm not necessarily familiar with. And then understanding all the ways that I can connect across my neighborhood, big and small, to the other learning experiences, and then really start to build demand for these wondrous and innovative learning experiences in our schools and our early learning centers and our libraries, in all of the places where young people might learn together. In a sense, it's about creating a learning landscape. It's about creating a neighborhood that Fred understood really well, right? Fred didn't create Mr. Rogers' school. He didn't create Mr. Rogers' classroom. It was Mr. Rogers' neighborhood. Fred understood that kids learn anywhere, anytime, and we need to light up the learning landscape for our kids and their families to experience joyful, wondrous learning together. And I'll mention that Ryan and I are hosting a series called Wonder With Us during Remake Learning Days. Each of the next 3 Tuesdays here during the month of May, we're going to be alongside some American superstars who are going to illuminate for us science and STEM, music and making, drawing and design. It's going to be a lot of fun, and we invite anyone, anywhere to join us for those really special evenings.
I know. I was going to say, if you enjoyed the session right now and love what you heard, the sessions When You Wonder or Wonder With Us will be so engaging. And I think the perspectives, I'm really excited about just hearing different perspectives of these great thought leaders. So we'll make sure we put the link into the chat so you can register for those events. They're free. And then also we have the Remake Learning events also in the chat, because I know there's virtual and on demand. So if it's not necessarily in your neighborhood, I've caught a lot of cool virtual things happening with my kids. And what better way to learn than with your own families and friends. All right. So thank you both so much for taking the time out today to share your thoughts, your perspective, the story of Fred. And I can't believe decades later, we're still excited about him and, using the Fred-like method. It's
well, thank you for having us. I mean, hopefully
it's very cool.
If we've done our job, then, we'll still be talking about the Fred method decades from now.
Yeah. I hope you're right. I think you're right. I have no doubt you're right. But we would love to give away a free copy of the book, When You Wonder You're Learning, today. Yes, it's a must read, especially as summer's upon us. It's a good beach read. I really believe it is. It's just a lighthearted, Fred makes everybody smile. So we're going to put the link to our survey in the chat. Feedback is a true gift for us. We are always looking to better, the topics, the conversation, all that good stuff. So Sue, our chat moderator, is going to put the form in the chat, and we will randomly select a winner. So please fill out that form and earn a book for your library. It's a good one to have. It's actually my coffee table book. I keep it on my coffee table, so when my friends come over, it's a nice conversation piece. Well, and it's a good teacher gift. It's a good teacher gift too. All my kids' teachers get it. So,
or Mother's Day, Father's Day.
Mother's Day, yeah, it's a good book. You can't go wrong.
Common Sense Education Neighborhood.
It sure is. It sure is. Well, thanks again. We hope to have you back on here soon. Everyone, enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Have a great weekend, everybody.
Be well.